Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Bellwitch entitled Future's Shadow Part 1, The Clandestine Gate. This is the fourth full-length studio album and the first entry in a three-part album series from this American funeral doom, quite possibly one of the most iconic and prolific of the 2010s of the past decade, which is in some way a legitimate accomplishment, I guess, maybe, sort of. I mean, it's hard to tell, since funeral doom, more so than any other niche metal subgenre, is pretty fucking niche, but whatever, you get the idea. They turned a lot of heads back in 2017 with their third album, Mirror Reaper, quite possibly one of the most critically acclaimed albums of that year. At the time, I wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't really vibing with it. Funeral doom was not a genre I cared much for. Still not my favorite, but I will concede that Mirror Reaper has grown on me immensely with time, and there's a lot about that album emotionally and conceptually that I think I can really appreciate now. Now, while Bellwitch did go on to release a collaborative record in 2020 with Aerial Ruin, they haven't really had an official follow-up to Mirror Reaper until now. For that reason alone, the hype levels were already set pretty reasonably high when this thing was announced, and obviously the levels were adjusted once the public learned that, once again, this is the first part in a three-part album series. Writing here on Facebook, in full, the three movements will complete one long-form piece of music that will form a loop. The theme is one of cycles: dawn, dusk, night, seasons, years, the lunar cycles, the tides, birth, death, etc. The clandestine gate represents dawn and or spring, initiation, birth, and crossing a threshold into the unknown. The first movement is where the composition comes into focus and is slowly illuminated. Now, unfortunately, right now, because we're really only looking at a fraction of this entire project, it's gonna be hard to properly score this, and for that reason, I might not actually properly score this. But today we will at least talk about what is on this album, what works, what doesn't work, what can or should not happen in the future, and what we can maybe possibly expect from Bellwitch and this full album trilogy when it is completed. Now, normally this is where we would start combing through the track list, pointing out the bangers, the duds, the in-betweens, but that's difficult to do today because I don't really have like 8 or 9 songs making up an entire album. I have one massive 84-minute piece making up an entire album. One thing I really like about this right off the bat is the immense consuming atmosphere of this record. You are not simply immersed in this world, you are swallowed whole by it, by waves of ethereal and cascading riffs and keyboards and backing vocals and haunting soundscapes. Foreboding organs, lurching riffs, and slow-paced yet thunderous percussion dominate this album and define it. It very consistently feels like being very gradually and painfully swallowed into like a black hole or some kind of like horrific Cthulhian monster of epic proportions. I also appreciate that there is some genuine versatility to this record. I appreciate that, all of its individual sections are pretty well paced and put together. Like, unlike your standard funeral doom, it's not just one long, continuous passage of miserable, doomy pounding. There's a lot going on within these individual sections that make up the entirety of the Clandestine Gate. Unfortunately, if on repeat listens, if you want to experience a particular section again, it is difficult to navigate because it all exists within one 84-minute time frame, but even so, it's all solid. On that note, though, one of the things I don't appreciate about this album is that it is a single song encompassing an entire album. Yes, the individual sections, as we've discussed, are pretty well paced and even a little versatile, but because they're all stitched together in one massive, continuous song spanning nearly an hour and a half, I still can't help but say to myself, God damn, when will Bell Witch get to the fucking point? And honestly, I fear that this is only going to get worse as this album trilogy goes along. If it is safe to assume that parts 2 and 3 are also 84 minutes long, just like part 1, then that means we're going to end up with roughly 252 minutes of Bellwitchian funeral doom. That's just over 4 hours. And I don't know about you, but I don't know if I have it in me to listen to essentially Funeral Doom's equivalent to the fucking director's edition of Apocalypse Now and The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. I mean, who knows? Maybe parts 2 and 3 will be drastically different, musically speaking. Maybe they'll be filled with all kinds of twists and turns and weird genre fusions and such. Maybe they'll get faster. I don't fucking know. It's difficult to say. But if I were in Vegas, I'd feel pretty comfortable betting on parts 2 and 3 being pretty similar to part 1. As far as this individual album is concerned, I would say overall it's still very well executed, very well produced, very well performed. It's clever. It's not fun per se, but it is a very interesting album, and it does offer a very unique, enveloping kind of experience. I am curious, warts and all, to see how this connects to the other two parts. I think right now, if you put a gun to my head and you were like, you must give this album a proper score, I would maybe go 3.5 out of 5, but I still don't know if I feel super comfortable actually giving a score, just because I'm only looking at, like, a piece of the puzzle. Granted, the puzzle doesn't have a ton of pieces to begin with, but even so, I'd like to see the puzzle completed before I, really throw down my final word and judgment and all, before I ultimately decide whether or not I think it's solid and or not solid. Whatever feelings you have about Bell Witch and Funeral Doom going into this album will very likely remain unchanged leaving this album. If you consider yourself a very impatient person, I would highly recommend you avoid this like the actual literal motherfucking plague. I still can't help but shake the feeling that, Bell Witch might have shot themselves in the foot, that this, might end up being just a little bit too fucking much, but obviously there's only one way to find out. For the time being, Future's Gate Part 1, Future's Shadow Part 1, The Clandestine Gate, it's solid. I guess it's good. I guess, in theory, if this were a standalone record, it'd be a solid 3.5 out of 5. Check it out. Preferably in, like, a cold, dark room with a bottle of red wine. Yeah, alright. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.